Hello, everybody. We are back in Star Trek Online with another perfectly unscientific review, and this time we're looking at the Voth Bastille Temporal Science Vessel, and this is one that recently received the Tier 6 treatment from its old Tier 5 counterpart in the most recent Infinity Lockbox update. This is the ship itself. It's a rather small-profiled ship, and, we can look at the stats of the ship in particular right now. The original Voth Temporal, or rather the original Voth Science vessel, shipped with a Commander Science, Lieutenant Commander Engineering, Lieutenant Universal, and Lieutenant Commander Universal seat. It was unique in that A, it had no tactical seating, and B, back then, it was highly uncommon for a ship to have 2 Lieutenant Commander seats, and it had that. But that's not so uncommon today, so let's look at what we got now. We have a Commander Science Temporal seat and a Lieutenant Universal Command seat, along with a Lieutenant Commander Engineering seat, a Lieutenant Commander Universal, and an Ensign Tactical seat. And that's this ship. It's interesting in that regard, in the way that it leans on the spectrum when it does what it does best, and that's drain. This hasn't been set up as a drain build for the purposes of this review because, it's hard to parse drain, and it's hard to do drain without encumbering your team, because it doesn't do great amounts of DPS on its own, and that's what we want. We want DPS so we don't have to worry about being carried. We want to carry the team. So let's have a look at the actual ship itself and what we get with the Tier 6 version. So starting off, let's look at the trait. So the trait is called Rapid Response Shielding, and the idea behind this one is that when you decloak or you activate emergency power to shields for 30 seconds, you'll get a boost to shield capacity, plus 50 exotic particle generators, and plus 50 drain expertise. And the reason for that is that the Voth ships can actually cloak, and we'll get to that in just a minute, how that works. So looking at the console for this ship, we already looked at the trait. It's the Enhanced Aceton Field Generator, minor buff to hull capacity and drain expertise, but when you activate it, it turns on aceton mode. All enemies within 5 kilometers will get minus 8.3 power settings every 1 second to a max of 6 stacks, and that's with our current level of drain expertise, which really isn't that high. You get 2.5 aceton charge for every incoming energy attack, and up to 100 damage resistance rating at 100 aceton charge. Then you release a gigantic aceton shockwave after 20 seconds, or when you toggle this console off, dealing 13,176 radiation damage. And the astute of you watching will note that this console is designed to work best with drain, and we're not running a drain setup here, so I'm not running the console. That'll be an exercise for later on, perhaps, how to best set this ship up for drain and how to capitalize on that. So I mentioned that this ship can cloak, and if you look at this console here, and we go down to the 2-piece, or the 3-piece rather, it's called Voth Cloak Technologies. I don't have the other 2 pieces of this console, but suffice to say, when you equip the console from the flight deck carrier and the bulwark dreadnought, the first one enables a standard cloak, and the third console you add to the set enables a battle cloak. So this indeed could be a battle cloaking science vessel if you did want to load up on all 3 Voth consoles, and a link to that console set will be included in the description below. So as I said, drain. We're not doing drain here, so we're not using this console, but let's look at what we are using on this. So this is a fairly typical exotic particle generator setup. We got the particle emission plasma torpedo, which generates nice clouds whenever we fire it, and you'll also note that this is another unique build in that it has no torpedo spread. So you'll be surprised how much damage this does without torpedo spread. So just keep an eye out for the parse later when we generate these clouds. We got the gravimetric photon torpedo and the Dyson proton weapon, and the reason we're running these as a 2-piece set is for the enhanced critical chance bonus and the nice buff to photon damage when we fire off our photon torpedo. We're running a colony deflector that boosts control expertise and a little bit of EPG, and of course gives us critical chance and critical severity. Our deteriorating secondary deflector is of course the linchpin to this build and pretty much any exotic particle generator build. This one's been set up to give us control expertise, a tiny bit of EPG, and buffs our sensor analysis damage buff by 20% when we place that on a target. We're running the 2-piece temporal set here, and the reason for that is that it gives us a plus 25 base damage boost for damage over time and hazard effects, predictive decay algorithms. Our warp core could be changed out to something else in particular if you have a different warp core that you like, but I use this one because its battery gives us a reduction to bridge officer cooldowns whenever we click it like so. See, we're already down at 18 seconds there on that. And then the temporal shield to complete that 2-piece set from the impulse engine. Then down here we have the chronometric calculation set made of the Omni beam array, the Krenim chronotron torpedo, and the chronometric capacitor, which boosts torpedo damage and EPG. And its 4-piece set gives us this click ability, which boosts our exotic damage and energy damage for 30 seconds whenever we activate it. Console-wise, we got the bioneural infusion circuits for critical severity, the plasma storm module, which is the big swirling orange cloud of death, which you'll see in the video. It does quite well. Timeline stabilizer to even out any bridge officer abilities that get left behind in our cooldown, though that's not really an issue anymore with photonic officer. The main reason we keep this one around is for reducing our captain bridge officer cooldown abilities like sensor scan, scattering field, and co-opt energy weapons, which is a hull heal that we use. For our science consoles, we're running the temporal disentanglement suite for critical chance and critical severity, which is of course boosted off our aux power, which makes sense that we might as well just use that since we're running high aux. The tachyokinetic converter, once again, critical chance, critical severity, and Starship control expertise. I'll be upgrading this later today, as this is an upgrade weekend. And then the rest of our consoles here are focused on Control X and EPG from the research lab, 2 consoles. And then an exotic particle field exciter for plus 75 EPG. Then down here in our tactical consoles, we're using these universal consoles to boost exotic damage. We get 20% Cat 2 exotic damage buff and 5 critical severity from the Deflector plus a nice click attack. And then the constriction anchor, which we're just using for a 25% bonus exotic damage boost, or Cat 2 boost as we call it. Now, bridge officer-wise, this one's interesting, I said, because you'll note there's no tactical torpedo spread abilities or chemocite or anything to that effect, and it still does quite well, 154k. So we got Gravity Well 3, which does an impressive amount of damage whenever we fire this off, one of our main damage dealers. Entropic Redistribution 3, which hits the main target you fire at for a nice burst of damage, but it also hits targets around it, assuming you build entropy on it, which we use our channel deconstruction for, which on its own is kind of, let's just say, underappreciated. But if you look at the parse, it does quite well. So channel deconstruction and entropic redistribution act as a 1-2 punch on large targets that stay alive for a while. Then we got Photonic Officer to reduce our bridge officer cooldown times and also boost exotic damage. More about that in the trait section in just a bit. Our lone tactical ability is Tactical Team 1. Engineering-wise, emergency powered engines to activate our Con Officer to reduce the cooldown of evasive maneuvers. Engineering Team 2, our Spike Hull Heal. And Structural Integrity Collapse 3, which gives us a physical damage resistance rating debuff, as well as a kinetic damage resistance rating debuff, and does some physical damage on its own. So this is a fun ability to have. Hazard Emitters 1, Charged Particle Burst 1, which is one of our main abilities that we use to activate our deteriorating secondary deflector. And you want to use this in an area where it's going to hit as many targets as it can, because as you can see here, it will affect foe up to 50 of them. So this is the best way to activate that deteriorating secondary deflector, which you'll see in the parse does quite well. Subspace Vortex 3, another huge hazard effect. This combined with Gravity Well, when paired together, is immaculate, and you want this on pretty much any science build that you can in order to maximize exotic damage. Then we're running a Tractor Beam here, and the reason for this is for the unconventional Tactics trait, which reduces the cooldown of our universal consoles, in particular the Plasma Storm, and you'll see that we use this numerous times in the run, I believe. Then just Destabilizing Resonance Beam 1, which is a AoE attack in a 3-kilometer sphere, does physical damage on its own, but also more importantly, activates our secondary Deflector. Now, looking at the stats of this, you can see right here, 22k shields, negative resist because we're sitting with Anchored on right now, 21% crit chance, 140 severity before taking into account Particle Manipulator. Then here's our science-based stats, 290 control and 386 EPG. And then for those of you who want to see the tactical stats and engineering stats. Skill tree-wise, attack ultimate skill tree, you could go balanced if you want in this. Of course, the main focus is that you take control expertise and drain infection for the exotic damage boost when you drain targets, in particular with charged particle burst. And our particle generator skill, which you definitely want to take if you're doing an exotic build, but there's the rest of the tree. Specialization-wise, we're running Temporal Primary. Amongst other things, this gives us plus 50 EPG boosts and a number of nice boosts, including a second life if we die. It regenerates our hull, proccing continuity, and gives us a couple of nice other little buffs throughout the way as well. So this damage over time buff, for example, amongst other things. Secondary, we're running Strategist, and we use counter-offensive without threat on. So when we're not threatening PlayState's foes, so it's a good way of ensuring that we're not hit. And if we're taking a bit of heat, we can activate this. And it also gives us potentially up to a 15% bonus all damage buff for 10 seconds whenever we activate this. So Strategist, it's pretty good. Now, moving on to the traits section, space trait-wise, Anchored, just pause if you want to read these. I'm going to go through them. Unconventional systems, which reduces cooldown of our exotic, or rather universal consoles. Conservation of energy. Menacing. Context is for kings. The most important particle manipulator for an exotic build. Pseudo-submission. Self-modulating fire. And Fleet Coordinator. Starship Trait-wise, improved Photonic Officer from the Tholian Iktomi, which of course gives us a Cat 2 exotic damage buff. Honor Dead. Improved Gravity Well from the Science Andorian. Ceaseless Momentum from the Section 31 Lockbox, buyable on the exchange. And Exotic Modulation from the Chronos Dreadnought for another exotic damage boost. Space Reputation-wise, Advanced Targeting Systems for critical severity, Chronocapacitor Array, Particle Generator Amplifier, Precision for critical chance, and Aux Power Offense from the Nukara Reputation. And aside from that, let's look at the duty officers before we begin. So space-wise, we are running a Zindi Biochemist for a chance to reduce threat after activating exotic damage abilities. Whenever we activate Gravity Well, 50% chance to reduce cooldown on all other exotic damage abilities. Chance to playstate when using Charged Particle Burst for 6 seconds. As I said, you're going to be taking a lot of threat with this, so this is something that you might consider. Con Officer to reduce, reset the cooldown of evasive maneuvers. A Energy Weapons Officer for critical severity buff, and an Energy Weapons Officer, again, for the critical severity buff. And you'll note that the color on those is different because I am not that rich and I don't want to spend that much on a single duty officer. So with that being said, let's have a look at the run and then the parse.
Please state the nature of the emergency.
You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile.
Target's shield has failed. Target's shield has failed. Shield failing. Core shield failing. Rear shield failing.
Disarm all weapons. We will escort us to your home port, where we will begin assimilating your culture and technology.
All right, so we're back, and here's the parse. 153.9K. We'll round up to 154 on that. 32K from the deteriorating secondary deflector, that is charged particle burst and destabilizing resonance beam only on this build. 21K from pets, and if we drill down into that, 11K from the Badlands Cyclone, 5.9 from the anti-time entanglement singularity. Subspace Vortex 16.4, Gravity Wheel 15.7, and since we're not running a torpedo spread, 13.2 from the particle emission plasma clouds, and Gravimetrics Rifts still did 6.3K even without a torpedo spread. Entropic redistribution 5K, structural integrity collapse 4.4K, and then it just goes down from there. There's our entropic rider, channel deconstruction, charge particle burst, all shield damage. Tractor beam came in at 2K. So there we have it. That's the Voth Bastille Temporal science vessel. And, you know, this is an interesting one, as I said, because the way I build for heavy exotics, so much so that I build these ships from time to time, and I don't even feel that I need the tactical abilities on them. That's just one way of doing exotic builds. And, you know, when it comes down to it at the end of the day, 154K isn't too bad, so it works. I'm going to be having a look in the near future into how we can maybe have a look and see how impressive Drain is, in particular with this ship and maybe a couple of other ones as well, because that's an area of science that is talked about but nobody really has a look at in a meaningful way. So that's potentially somewhere we can go in the future. But nonetheless, if you found this video at all interesting, like and subscribe, and we'll be back for more. Take care, everyone.